The Providence Journal invited 8 public officials to discuss race in Rhode Island, our series about the state's changing population, the gaps that have developed among the races, and the consequences for all of us. Their comments will help shape public policy and set the climate for how we treat each other. Mayor, thank you very much for participating. We published a series of stories called Race in Rhode Island that has shown that the state's population is changing dramatically. At the same time, we're developing these huge gaps among the races in all kinds of areas: housing, home ownership, income, health equities. And we've also tried to show that at the same time, there's been huge consequences for all of that to all Rhode Islanders. So at the point now, we're inviting 8 state and local policymakers in just to discuss the series with us. So I'll just ask the first question. What have you learned from the series at all? What has surprised you?
Yeah, first of all, I do want to thank the Projo for even having this series. It's been an important conversation here in the city. It's been an important conversation across our country for the last several months and years. And I'm glad it's getting the attention that it deserves. So, I think that the Race in Rhode Island series has taught us a lot of what we already know and has reinforced it. And that's that the state is changing. The state is changing. It's more diverse. And you have folks, people of color, that are making contributions in so many different areas. But at the same time, the numbers don't lie. And you look at our schools, you look at unemployment, you look at health disparities, with so many different indicators. People of color are falling further and further behind. And this is a big challenge for myself and for all policymakers. We want to make sure that we bring this commitment to equity, and making sure that every one of our residents is included and involved in our policies and in our priorities for the city. And as we turn the page on the recession, we want to make sure that all of our residents benefit, that it's not an imbalanced benefit where it only goes to one section of the city or folks from one demographic. And in order for this to truly work for the city and for the state, it has to be the entire city, every single neighborhood. The same is true with our schools. Our schools have been such a key priority of mine, and our future absolutely depends on it. In order to make sure that we have a bright future with education, we have to provide these opportunities for every single one of our children. So there's a lot that goes into that, but we're putting a lot of energy, a lot of effort to make sure that every single child, no matter what zip code they live in, no matter what school they go to, that they have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. And that's our goal. But you keep looking at different indices. I mentioned health as well. Look at recreation opportunities in so many different ways. People of color lag behind, and it's important that we continue to bring attention to this so that we can address it directly.
Alicia, do you have a question?
Yeah, I know one of the biggest issues with race relations right now currently is the relationship between the city and police officers. So, with particularly residents of color, are there areas you want to improve further, and if so, what areas specifically?
Sure. When I think of public safety, and I think of public safety and community relationships, there are two very different ideas that stand out in my mind. I remember when I was young, back in 1998, I was 23 years old. I was outside. I was on the south side for a big festival that we had, and it was getting somewhat chaotic outside. And I remember being outside with my bicycle, with a group of friends, and we hear some shots fired, maybe the next block over. So you see crowds just running away, and you see police officers running towards it, and that had a lasting impact on me. These are people who risk their safety and risk their life to protect us. So I think of that. On the other hand, I also think of just being a person of color growing up in the city. Again, being on my bicycle throughout the city as a young person, I've been harassed. I've been pulled over many times, to the point that I've seen that growing up as a person of color in the city, it's unfortunately a fact of life that you just deal with. And so I've seen both of those. I've seen both of those ends. And so as I approach this job and I work with the police department, my absolute focus is making sure that we're continuing to reinforce those bonds and relationship between the police department and the community. Because if you look at all the cities throughout the country that are having these challenges, at the root of it is this disconnect between the police department and the community. Now, we've done a lot here in the city, community policing. You see our chief at almost every single event, and representatives of the police department. They're playing sports with our kids. They're at community meetings. So we've done a lot, but we can absolutely do more. And there are a lot of things that we're currently doing that I'm very proud of, and that we're going to continue to do. Now, we had a very successful Midnight Basketball League this summer, and public safety was at every single one. It was much more than just basketball. We were also recruiting for the police department. We were providing different services from the city. We were registering people to vote. The Secretary of State was there. And so, that went very well, but we need to do more. What we're also doing is working with our workforce development dollars. There are a lot of people in the community, in particular, people of color in the community, that are willing and ready to take advantage of workforce development opportunities. But that bridge between the resources and the community that wants to take advantage of it hasn't always existed. So we're out there in the community, not waiting for people to come to us, but proactively being out there recruiting. The work that we're doing in our schools as well, this all has an equity agenda. It's about bringing opportunity to every single one of our kids and every single one of our residents. With respect to the police department, we were very, very aggressive about recruiting and communicating the need to recruit more minorities and women to the police department. I'm very proud of the fact that we have the most diverse recruiting class in the history of the Providence Police Department, and so I'm very proud of that. But still, we need to do more. Once the new police officers, once they're officially on the police force, and they're deployed to the streets of Providence, we have to make sure that they're walking the neighborhoods, they're getting to know the kids, they're engaged in after-school activities, they're engaged in these sports activities, they're in the community, so that we can build these bonds closer and closer together. And I'm very optimistic because the conversations that I've had with police officers, and a lot of conversations that I've had with recent hires in the police department, they're very eager to continue to build those relationships. And the interactions I've had with the community wants to know their police officer by name. They want those relationships as well. So we have willing participants on each side. It's just a matter of continuing to provide those opportunities where those relationships can come together in a very strong way.
Just to follow up on that, when you say you're moving around the city, and I think you said sometimes you're questioned or you're stopped or whatever, do you ever mention that to the commissioner or the police chief? And if you do, what do they say about that?
Things that used to happen. So when they don't happen so much to me anymore, but when I was young, so I've been pulled over multiple times on my bicycle, of all things on my bicycle, pulled over in my car. That happened so many times, I can't even remember how many. So I remember, that we would have to deal with that as young people with the police department. I think that we've improved since then. So we've made real gains, but the truth is that we still have further to go. And so I keep that in mind when I hear about a person being harassed or a person being pulled over and they believe for no reason. I believe, I know I've seen it myself that sometimes it does happen. Yeah. At the same time, I also had an incident. This is about 2.5, 3 years ago. Where I was treated very disrespectfully by a police officer. He didn't know that I was considering running for mayor at the time, and I certainly didn't mention it. But I remember the situation very well, and this police officer was very disrespectful to me. So when I hear stories that allegations that it happens, I know it happens because it happened to me, and that's what encourages me and challenges me in the city to have to do better. Now, at the same time, we can't paint with a broad brush and say because one police officer does it, they all do it. We have a lot of great men and women in uniform But we have to recognize the truth. The truth is that it happens and that we have to do better to root that out of the police department. And with the conversations that I've had directly with police officers, I see a genuine willingness to want to root that out of the police department and to build better relationships, and that's what makes me optimistic.
Did you have that conversation with that officer now that you're mayor?
No, I haven't.
Is he still an officer, he or she?
He is still an officer, yes.
And I just had one other question since we're on this one. There's a drive to have a black sergeant. What are your thoughts on that? And I know there's a rally on November 2nd.
Well, we have many black sergeants. There's a drive to have a black major.
Major.
Yeah, so the highest ranking African American in the police department right now is a sergeant. There are no African American lieutenants, no African American captains, and then no African American majors and above. So, first principle is I absolutely believe that we should have all of our municipal workers, that they should reflect the city that they serve. This is true in the police department, it's true in our schools, it's true with municipal workers across the board. Across the board, they should reflect the community. So with respect to the police department, we had a very aggressive recruiting campaign for the new academy, and we have the most diverse in history. Second, I think that we can also do a better job. Once they're part of the police force, have a mentorship program and a professional development program specifically for police officers of color and for women, to make sure that they are, the ones that seek it out, that they're on a leadership track. So I think that there's a lot more that we can do to make sure that we have a very strong pipeline of candidates to move beyond sergeant, into lieutenant, into captain, and then into mayor, and perhaps into chief. So we can do that. The last piece of this, and this is a challenge, but it's a priority of mine, that we'll be having a conversation with the Providence Police Department union with, is that currently, to be promoted after sergeant into lieutenant and captain, the city has very little flexibility. It's done by seniority and through testing. It's only 10% flexibility or discretion that the city has in that. And so I want to make sure that that's part of collective bargaining. So we're going to sit down with the union. We're going to let them know that this is a priority of mine, and that we want to see some change so that we have more discretion, so that more women and minorities will be promoted up the ranks.
Christine, you want to jump in?
Yeah, following up on the police issues, recently there was an incident with the Dunkin' Donuts and the Black Lives Matter. Do you think the police union overreacted to that incident, or do you think that, in their view, it's a legitimate threat or legitimately an offensive term to use Black Lives Matter in that way?
Yeah. Well, I'll leave the police union to communicate, as they see fit. My concern and my priority as the mayor is to make sure that we have strong relationships between the community and the police. That's my absolute focus. And there are elements in our community that might pull us apart, but I want to make sure that we focus on bringing people together. And I've spoken to a number of leaders in the community. I've spoken to a number of rank and file, and also leadership in the police academy and in the police force. And they have that same interest. They share that same vision, and they want to come together. Every single person understands that we're a stronger city, a stronger community, and a safer city and community when we have those strong relationships. So everyone is committed to this. I'm committed to it, from City Hall all the way down, and that's what we continue to focus on all of our initiatives.
But what were your thoughts about what happened? I mean, on a gut level, when you heard about what happened?
Yeah. So the Black Lives Matter movement, they've done an excellent job of bringing to the national consciousness the way that African Americans over the years have been systematically marginalized when it comes to education, economic opportunities, health disparities, and public safety, of course. In so many ways, it's been occurring, but it hasn't been given the attention that it deserves. And so I give great credit to the Black Lives Matter movement. They have their hand on an important issue. They've raised it to national consciousness, and it's a conversation that we need to be having. And so from my perspective, when I engage in that conversation, I look to engage in that conversation from the perspective of what can we do about this in a way that brings people together and provides the kinds of opportunities that this movement has been so effective in making us realize have been missing. So that's my absolute focus when I work on this. And so many steps that we've taken throughout the city have been focused in addressing this, pernicious and long-standing inequality.
Yes,
Yes, I would like to ask about, I would like your thoughts, basically about the race series. It definitely have fostered many difficult and needed discussions. I believe it has increased the cultural intelligence of readers, and I want to know, what do you think would be the next steps that we could be taking as a society, as community organizations, in your office? What would be the next steps that could be taken to leverage those conversations?
Yeah, I think that the raising of consciousness is important in and of itself. So just us having the conversation and us, recognizing there's something really powerful about the statistics behind this. You look at so many different outcomes and how, race is an important factor. We don't live in a post-racial world. It's still very much alive. People see things through a racial lens, and it's important to simply have the conversation and raise consciousness. So that in and of itself is important. Beyond that, we want to translate what we learn from this conversation into real policies and real change in our communities and in our society. And remembering that we have to be conscious of these issues, because ignoring them simply prolongs the inequality. And that's a big part of the reason why I've launched this initiative along the Broad Street corridor to make sure that we address issues of poverty, issues of unemployment, issues of disinvestment and blight in the housing stock, to make sure we're bringing all different community partners, and to make sure that we're aligning all of our resources, bringing new resources, creating opportunities for residents, to make sure that we can convert what has historically been a very disinvested and blighted neighborhood into a very strong and stable one. So we want to move simply beyond conversation, but into action, so that we can have real policies that have real change in people's lives. And I think that Providence has done a lot in this area. We have to do more, and then on top of this, we have to recognize that it's not just Providence, it's not just the city. It's every single community, it's every single neighborhood, it's every single street, it's every single social group. We have to be conscious about these issues, and we have to take it very seriously, so that we aren't just talking about it or hearing about it, but also changing the way we go about our daily lives.
Are there policies that you already have ready and willing to go forward after reading some of the Race in Rhode Island series?
So there are a lot, and the policies, they come together sort of at the same time that we're having the conversation locally and nationally around race. I mentioned the Broad Street Corridor Initiative. I've also launched an initiative around abandoned properties throughout the city. This is absolutely being done with an equity agenda. Not only is it about fixing all these abandoned properties throughout the city, but it's also about working with our women and minority contractors. I've been working very closely with them. So with this program, what we want to make sure is that as all of these properties throughout the city are getting fixed, I don't want some company from Massachusetts or one big construction company to come in and do all the work. I want these properties to be fixed by construction companies right in our neighborhoods. People have been struggling for a very long time, talking about small businesses, minority-owned businesses, and women-owned businesses. And what we've been doing is bringing together the minority contractors and women contractors together with the receivers who effectively administer and manage that portion of the program, and making sure that as these projects go out to bid, that those connections exist, so that the minority contractors, they'll be putting successful bids, and folks from our own neighborhoods, that reflect our own community, they'll be responsible for building up and rehabbing these homes that will stabilize our neighborhoods. Along with that, we're doing a lot of work in our schools. There's been a lot of focus. I visit about 2 schools a week. I'm in the school buildings all of the time. I believe that, in our schools, all of our teachers, our administrators, they should reflect the community that they serve. And when you look at people of color or children of color in our schools, upwards of 90% of kids in our public schools are kids of color.
Yet you have 2,000 white teachers.
Yeah, and then when you look at teachers, it's almost the exact reverse. This has occurred over a long period of time, and it simply has to change. You look at other communities such as Central Falls. They're doing great work in their school department. They have a policy that every single one of their teachers, every single one of their new teachers has to have an ELL certificate, and they don't have to be Latino, but they have to speak Spanish. And this is because these are the needs of that community. We have specific needs here in Providence as well, and there's nothing stopping us from having much closer links and ties between the needs of the community and the people that are working to serve those needs. So we have a ways to go, but we're very conscious of this conversation that we're having at the local and national level, and being very intentional that finds its way into the priorities that we set.
Christine, did you have a follow-up on that?
Well, I just wondered what the receivership program, are the receivers going to be required? Is there a requirement that they have to use women or minority contractors, local people to do the work? Because I didn't see that was a set requirement.
Yeah, so we can't require that. The way that the receivership works is that from the city's perspective, I don't care so much who fixes the property, meaning if it's the owner, if it's the bank, or if it's the receiver. I just want it fixed.
Right.
So the city side of this process is we tee it up so that someone has to fix it. And if the owner says no, the bank says no, then we go to the courts, and the courts appoint a receiver. Once the court appoints a receiver, this isn't a public initiative anymore.
Right.
So the receiver is answerable to the court, and the court is answerable to the creditors. And so we can't require the receivers to hire minority contractors. But what we can do is connect the receivers with the minority contractors. We can educate the minority contractors on how to bid for these projects, and make sure that we're providing the technical assistance so that they're submitting very, very good applications, so that this process and an initiative doesn't happen without this community ever even knowing about it.
Right.
We want them to be in there right from the very beginning, so they know how to participate.
So they can bid for the jobs.
Exactly.
Right.
And the receivers,
Right.
I have to give them credit. They've been very, very receptive, and they've been very open to working with the minority contractors, and many of the minority contractors have already received some of these jobs. So I'm very, very happy about that. But we've let it be known to them that we want Providence residents to do this work. We want women and minority-owned businesses to be part of this process, and they've heeded that, and they've been very, very accommodating.
Mayor, I know you talked a lot about representing and looking like the city that you serve, and that being a priority for you. There's been several reports and criticisms that your staff doesn't reflect that now, and you talked about how the teachers don't reflect that. How do you specifically make sure the makeup of your cabinet, of your staff, of your schools, when you already have a set number of teachers here?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
And what do you
Well,
plan on doing?
first of all, I want to address that point. I know a lot of people in the community have expressed concern about my administration, but when they express concern to me directly, I tell them, well, let's go person by person, and once you go through it person by person, you see it actually is very diverse and represents the city as a whole. And this is on the city side, and also the folks that we've been hiring on the school side as well. This is absolutely important, and we're very, very mindful and careful that we're hiring people that do reflect the city that they serve.
How many of color members do you have in your cabinet?
Yeah, we can get to the number, but it's many. So in terms of Department of beginning with Advanced, also Department of City Services, from Human Resources, from our Policy Department, to our Innovation Office, to our you look up and down in all of these departments. And I'm very proud of the people of color that I recruited into my administration. So we can get you the exact numbers, but when you look at who is represented in my administration, it reflects the city that they serve. Now, another piece of this as well, and this is something that I feel very strongly about, is that I believe that as many of our employees as possible should live in the city. Unfortunately, it can't be a requirement anymore because the state statute preempts it. But I want as many Providence residents to be working in the city, and this is one of the ways that we're recruiting more people of color to our police force, is by having extra additional points that are granted to people who actually live in the city. Now, unfortunately, once they join the police force, they can move out, and this is something that we have to be creative about how we structure this process, so that we can encourage and incent for them to remain in the city. But that's something that will help us increase the number of minorities or people of color, and I think it'll also help in the way that we deliver services, be it police services, education services, or city services. I think that the more connected you are to the community, the more relationships you have in the neighborhoods and are up to date on sort of the latest buzz and what's moving and shaking in the neighborhoods, I think the more responsive that you're going to be to the community's needs. So hiring more people who live in the city is very important.
Who's next? Christy, you have one?
Yes. We've talked about home ownership and how that is so important to help families build wealth that can be passed on to generations and help them tap equity for school, for college. But yet, in Rhode Island, our rate of minority home ownership is the lowest in the whole country. And so what can be done to help this issue in Providence and in the state as a whole? What do you think should be done?
I think a lot needs to be done. There are a lot of immediate things we can do, midterm and also long term. One immediate thing that we can do is through our receivership process and through the Every Home initiative, where we're fixing up all of the abandoned properties.
Right.
We can work directly with our community development corporations, and we can work directly with our receivers to make sure that when these homes are sold, that we have qualified home buyers, that we have people who are from the neighborhood and from the community that are ready to move into and purchase these homes. So that's one immediate thing that we can do. Intermediate, we also have to build wealth within the community. And you look at some of our neighborhoods. Some of our neighborhoods have poverty rates, or rather unemployment rates, of over 20%. It's really difficult to purchase a home when you don't have a job, and we have to put people to work. We have to create economic opportunities. We're doing that through a number of efforts we're doing with economic development. We're also putting a lot of energy into workforce development. There are a number of jobs available out there, and people willing and able to do those jobs, but that bridge doesn't exist, or they might not have those skills yet. But after perhaps a 6-week training course, now they're ready for it. And so instead of training and then praying that they get a job, we're being much more laser focused, where we're training and placing directly into specific jobs. And so we have to build wealth. We have to build create jobs and put people to work. And then over the long term as well, unfortunately, here in the city, a lot of our young people, they might come out of these neighborhoods, but once they graduate high school or they graduate college, they're not staying behind to be residents in our neighborhoods and eventually home buyers. It's very important to me that we retain as many of our young high school and college graduates as possible, and I launched a millennial task force that's providing recommendations to the city of how we can be more millennial friendly. Also, I want to work with the universities so that their students are more and more integrated into the local community before they graduate, so that they build those ties and are more likely to remain. I think that and I speak from experience on this. When you look at people of color growing up here in the city, oftentimes young people don't see their future attached here to the city. And so many of us in our minds, we think, as soon as I graduate and have the chance, I'm leaving Providence or I'm leaving Rhode Island. And I did that myself. When I graduated from college, I moved to New York City. I came back afterwards. A lot of people do come back afterwards. But we can't afford to chance it. We can't afford to let them slip out of our hands until they slip out of our hands. We have to keep them here. And so working with young people and creating a sense of community that they believe they belong to and that is supportive of them over the long term will go a long way to make sure that they stay here and they'll eventually become our residents and our home buyers.
Mayor, when you mentioned a minute ago the unemployment rate in some neighborhoods more than 20%, I recall that after the Charlestown shootings, the Interfaith Service down at the Episcopal Church, you spoke, and I heard you say about the two major problems here and across the country, poverty and racism. And I'd like you to explain to me, how does racism divide the city economically?
I think in a lot of ways there are these subtle yet powerful ways that race plays a role. So for example, I'm sure many of us have heard about the studies where you send out identical resumes, but one has a traditional sort of white American sounding name and one has a traditional African American sounding name, and the ones with the African American names, they get much fewer just callbacks for interviews. I can imagine that happens. You multiply that on a larger scale, and you have a number of people who are shut out of opportunities that they would be phenomenal for, but they never get to have their foot in the door. And we have to be conscious of that, and because of that, we have to work proactively to address it. And there are a lot of organizations that are doing it. Two organizations stand out in my mind. There are many, but there are two in particular doing great work in that area. One is College Visions, working with high school kids to connect them to the universities, because a lot of times many high school kids we rule ourselves out, or we leave ourselves out of these opportunities because we don't know anyone who has a professional job in our lives, so we haven't seen it, so we don't see ourselves in that role. The exact same thing happened to me. And what College Vision does is encourages kids, young people, to dream and to see in themselves what they haven't, physically or seen with their own eyes. And it's not only encouraging them to think about college, but literally opening the door to college campuses so that they can see themselves within it. The other organization I think is just doing great work is Year Up. Year Up, based here downtown, is working with so many kids of color. And these are kids who, I tell you, they have so much potential, and they're so eager to realize that potential. And all they're asking for, all that they need is an opportunity. You crack that door open for them, they will show what they have to offer, and they will take full advantage of the opportunity. I'm a mentor in this program. My mentee, he is just a brilliant young kid. He amazes me and inspires me every time that we talk. And I think, just like he is sitting before me, I imagine there are hundreds of kids throughout our city that have that same spirit and potential, but just don't have that door cracked open for them. And so the more that we can encourage organizations and groups to just crack that door open, that's all we're asking for. Give us a shot, and we'll do the rest. But as long as more people and more organizations are doing that, there's going to be a great change in the city.
Who's next?
you.
Claudia?
So, just to sum up, how do you see your role improving race relations in Rhode Island and in Providence? And have you ever think about doing diversity training for your employees? What are you proactively doing to improve race relations?
Yeah, there's a lot that you can do from this seat, and in particular, one thing that I've been very inspired by by what you can do as the mayor of the city is during high school graduations, I went and I spoke at every single graduation ceremony, and I spoke to kids from the heart. I told them my story. I told them I sat in those exact same seats and perhaps had a lot of the same thoughts that they have in their mind. I had them 20 years ago. And these are thoughts about our aspirations, but also our worries and our insecurities. And it's so neat to be able to, have a story that resonates with them, that they can identify with, and that I can offer bits of advice that will be relevant to their next several months and years, that perhaps they can take away with them and learn from some of my mistakes and perhaps from some of my successes, and it'll help them in their process as well. And so I tell my story and I offer my words of wisdom, and it's amazing how often kids come to me in the street. So high school graduates or their parents, they come to me in the streets and they said, "You spoke at my child's graduation and you inspired him," or "I listened to you in your graduation and you inspired me." And that we can't take for granted. And so this position as being mayor here in the city provides a very powerful perch to be able to touch people's lives in that very intangible but powerful way. Beyond that, we have to make sure that we're adopting concrete policies that move the needle, so that we can open more doors to people of color. I do that in terms of the organizations that we partner with and the organizations that we support on behalf of the city, to make sure that more of these opportunities they're not just available, but these opportunities are opening doors for kids in every single one of our neighborhoods. Beyond that, we also have to focus on this equity agenda around making sure that we eliminate blight from our neighborhoods, that we are providing recreational activities, healthy, safe recreational opportunities for our kids. Case in point, parents, it's a challenge for parents, especially during the summer when their kids aren't going to school. Daycare is extremely expensive. And so what do you do with your kids during the summer? This summer, I am very, very proud that my recreation department, we offered full-time recreation opportunities for Providence kids at a cost of $5 a week for Providence parents. $5 a week, and more people took advantage of this than have in recent memory. We going back as far as we could see, we've never had such an expansive recreation program in the city. This is part of the equity agenda. Workforce development priorities, that's part of the equity agenda. Connecting minority and women-owned businesses with the receivership process, that's part of the same agenda. And so I look forward to continuing to work with so many different stakeholders and groups, so that we can provide the same opportunities that everyone has, that everyone should have throughout the city, making sure that we build those bridges, and kids and people in our most impoverished and historically marginalized neighborhoods, that they have these opportunities as well.
Mayor, I know you talked about equity, but Providence is so much seen as a very divided. There's the east side, and then there's everybody else. Superintendent Mayor talked about it and how to balance that when you have so much pushback or people asking you to keep things status quo. How do you specifically create that one Providence that you want to create And how do you assess your plan to combat that? How do you assess your first 9 months with doing that? I know One Providence was huge for you during your campaign.
Yeah, I think that I've been part of a lot of community conversations, and sometimes someone will give a comment that has a strain of we deserve more than another, and every time I hear that, I redirect it to what we have in common. I mean, look, we have our challenges here in the city, and there are no shortage of things that we don't have in common. But just as there's no shortage of things that we don't have in common, there's no shortage of things that we actually do have in common. And those things that we do have in common, they're big deals. They're great issues. And we can focus all of our attention working together on what we have in common, or we could focus all of our attention divided and focusing on what brings us apart. And so take, for example, our schools, the state of our schools. Whether you live on the south side, the north end, the east side, or the west side of the city, all you want is a great educational opportunity for your kids, and for your kids and other kids as well. But parents have a right to demand the best possible education for their children. And when you look at what we're putting in place right now in the school department, it benefits every single person. So, for example, we're focusing a lot on central administration. Central administration, yeah, it's administrative, it's kind of sort of backroom stuff, but it's also very powerful, because if we shift resources from central administration and we put them in the front lines in the schools where they can be more supportive of teachers and principals, well, then it makes a very real difference in people's lives. The people that remain in central administration, if they receive customer service training, so that when someone comes to central admin and has a complaint, if there's someone that's going to greet you with a smile, and as you walk away, you're going to feel that there's someone in central administration that's a champion for your child, that's going to advocate for you and your child, that makes all the difference in the world, and it benefits anyone from throughout the entire city. And so, with education, with any issue, we can focus on what brings us apart, or we can focus on what we have in common. And what I continually try to do is focus on what brings us together and redirect the conversation in that way. And the more we focus on that, the more we can find and explore ways where we can work together in a way that works for us all.
So you feel like there's an equitable division of schools, and every child is being equally
no, not at all. You look at our schools. There are some schools that are high performing. You look at some schools that are low performing. The numbers don't lie. And so we're focusing on making sure that every single school improves. Wherever it is that you're at, even if you're high performing, you can do much better. And certainly if you're low performing, you have to do much better. But it's this idea that this is not an either or. Either you're helping one or you're helping the other, but you can't do both. We can absolutely do both. We are doing both, and that's reflected in so many of the policy priorities and the initiatives that we've undertaken. So oftentimes people will phrase their comments, or they will be coming from a perspective where it's a fool's choice between it's either one or the other, and it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, it hardly ever is that way. There almost always is a point of convergence where you can help one and help the other, and you can have this synergistic effect where you get people working together. You can do so much more than you even thought was possible, but you have to get people working together, and that's my job. Trying to find creative ways that we can leverage resources, bring new people into the mix, and help every single group, institution, school, whatever it may be, improve, regardless of where they're at.
Christine, you have one?
I had one more that
Last week, Rhode Island Housing approved some funding to help some more affordable housing be built in South Providence. I think it was about 50 units, and the head of SWAP was saying that she had 700 people on a waiting list waiting for affordable housing, just with her agency. But yet Housing Works came out with a report recently saying that only a few suburban communities, or more than a few, have not even met their 10%. Of course, Providence is well above having 10% of its housing stock be affordable. Would you say to some suburban communities who are lagging, hey, you need to do more to do your part? Because even though no one's saying we should stop investing in, say, South Providence, people do say we shouldn't have all our affordable housing just in a few urban cores.
Yeah. So, I know a lot of suburban communities have gone through this, and if you poll people, they'll say they support affordable housing. But if you poll people, do you support affordable housing in your neighborhood?
Right.
Well, all right, that changes things. But you look at so many suburban communities that have gone through this, and there is often this resistance to affordable housing in your backyard. But through litigation, through lawsuits, we have those affordable housing units built in those communities.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turns out that the sky doesn't fall. Now, that the world doesn't change overnight, and that it's okay. In fact, that those affordable housing developments, they usually blend into those neighborhoods in a very comfortable and a very seamless way. And so, what I say to suburban communities that resist affordable housing, look, there's enough of a track record now. Look at the history. The sky doesn't fall. And the last piece of this, when people think of building affordable housing in the suburbs, they think, oh, all of these people from the city are going to be moving in, and there goes the neighborhood. What they don't realize is that there are poor people in their own communities,
Right.
Perhaps beneath their radar, but they exist in those same communities. And you look at even communities in this state that have built affordable housing, and then it turns out that they have people who qualify for that affordable housing from their own communities that need it. And so it comes back to this point, the sky doesn't fall when you build affordable housing. Now, with that said, coming back to Providence, housing is so important. If you don't have stable and healthy housing, then your kid is going to suffer in school. Their educational opportunities over the long term, wage earning opportunities over the long term, health disparities, they all become an issue. So I really do believe that you have to start with a firm foundation, and that means safe and stable, healthy housing. And what we're doing with the Every Home initiative, 600 homes throughout the city, many of them double and triple deckers. So over 1,000 units of maybe even 1,500 units of over 1,500 units throughout the city, currently laying vacant, and they've been vacant for years. They've been vacant, for 5, 6, 7 years. So once we fix them and we bring them online, what it's going to do, it's going to create this increased supply of homes, whereas now there's this housing crunch where demand is high and supply is low. That drives up prices by bringing more homes onto the market, and that this provides housing for more people and at a more affordable level because there's just greater supply. And I want to make sure that we continue to work with our community development corporations because the people who purchase these homes, we want them to be responsible home buyers. We don't want them to be somebody who's just going to speculate on the appreciation of the properties, hoping for the value to go out, that sell it to somebody else who is gonna raise the rents. We want it to be responsible homeowners that are committed to the neighborhood and to be in there for the long term.
So have you asked those receivers not to sell or not to sell to investors, or try to sell to people who are going to be actually living in the homes?
Yeah.
Is that one thing you've asked them to do?
Yeah, no, I have, and I've been clear to them, the kind of homeowner that I want to see. At the same time, we have to stress that once it's in their hands, they're responsible to the court, and the court is responsible to the creditors. So the court's responsibility is to maximize the returns, but it's not just about the most productive use in terms of dollars raised. It's also the most productive use in terms of impact to the neighborhood. And so the more we work with the receivers and the judges and let them know that it's better for everyone involved, if we bring homeowners and people committed to being there for the long term, the more effective it's going to be for everyone involved.
I have one final question. I don't know where we are in time, but we've had
Time for a couple more. Go ahead.
retired teachers say there's no such thing as white privilege. We've had leaders say that as well and say there's no such thing as racism. We've had people say that blacks are lazy and it's their own fault that they're in the position they're in. What do you say to those people here in Rhode Island, here in Providence?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of these conversations just personally over the years, and I certainly hear comments that people make, and you often don't know exactly what people mean, but this is what I think. If someone denies that race plays a role in educational, health, or income/wealth inequality, then all you have to do is just point them to mounds of research and literature, and say, well, study up. Do some research first. It's to the point where we're, as far as I'm concerned, we're beyond that conversation. If someone denies that that's even an issue, well, then you say, okay, next question, next comment. The facts are facts, and I think denying facts doesn't do us any good. I think that acknowledging the facts, whether you agree with the conclusion or not, or what the conclusion means, acknowledging those facts is a very important first step. And once we acknowledge those facts, well, then we can figure out what we do about those specific facts. If someone acknowledges that race exists, but then says that the way forward is by being colorblind, I disagree, but at least I can engage in that conversation. If you just disagree that there is even a difference, well then we all have better things to do and more productive things to do. So as far as I'm concerned, and the things I try to do in the city is focus on moving the needle or rolling the ball forward productively every single day, and that means making sure that you shut out these conversations that either draw us apart or try to bring us backwards. You focus on, you surround yourself by people who are willing to engage in a productive conversation. You focus on partners who want to move the situation forward in that exact same way. And then you come up with a plan, you work on it, you evaluate your results, you look back, you ask yourself, how can we do it better next time? And you keep moving the ball forward. But to answer your point, I mean, there are people who either want to drive us apart or move the conversation backwards. We can't get distracted by this. The work is too important. We have to keep going forward.
That's fine and well, but what if that person is somebody very high up, somebody in General Assembly, somebody higher than you that has the money and sets the budgets for the state? I mean, if that person is still in denial, you can't ignore that, then what do you do?
Yeah, so this comes up, look at the immigration debate that we're having throughout the United States, and some of the comments, some of the perspectives. I mean, they're disturbing, and my take on it is, look, nothing I do is going to change their mind, and so instead of engaging in a conversation that's going to lead nowhere, how can I work with like-minded people who want to see progress in this area. How can we work to move the ball forward? And rather than being dragged down into a conversation that leads to no place, I focus on how we can be productive. There are a lot of there are a lot of conversations, a lot of people. I think of it sort of like an alligator. An alligator and how they're effective. What an alligator does is it grabs hold of you and it drags you down to the bottom of the pond where you just drown. And so rather than engage in people like this that are just going to bring you down to the bottom of the pond, avoid them entirely and focus on how you can be productive. Yeah. There are a lot of distractions, a lot of things that can distract us out there. But you have to stay focused. You have to stay focused. And what drives me in what I stay focused on is a belief that most of us, in fact, an overwhelming majority of us, are on the right side of justice, and we want to work together to make progress in some of these great challenges that we have in our society. And there are allies that you can use to move the ball forward, and that's proven true during the 10 months so far in my administration. It's proven true throughout the 38 years of my life, and I'm absolutely convinced that it will continue to be true going forward.
So that's just about an hour. Thank you very much, Mayor. We really appreciate it. I'd like to come back again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time.